Prime Minister today, but we are lucky enough to have on the program Trent Zimmerman, New South Wales Liberal MP from the seat of North Sydney. Trent Zimmerman, good to have you with us.
Good afternoon and Happy New Year, Chinese and otherwise.
Chinese and otherwise, yes, and belatedly so, but always good to talk to you. Look, first of all, to this refugee deal, you would have to be mightily relieved, I suspect, after some of the rhetoric of Donald Trump through the election campaign, that it does now appear to have survived, that Malcolm Turnbull has convinced the incoming president to meet a commitment made by his predecessor.
Well, I think the government has always been optimistic that the deal would hold, both because of the work that everyone from the Prime Minister down and through our Ambassador Joe Hockey and our other officials have done with the Trump transition team, but also I think it reflects the historic strength of our relationship with the United States. The US has always had a very close and good working relationship with Australia, and it would have been very disappointing if they had not proceeded down the path that they appear to be doing.
Now, this is, without doubt, a significant victory against the odds, I'd say, for Malcolm Turnbull, particularly, as I was saying, given what Donald Trump has been saying about immigration and, indeed, his actions in the last 48 hours with that executive order. Why aren't we seeing the Prime Minister out and about telling us about the details this afternoon?
Well, I think these conversations between world leaders usually aren't followed by transcripts of their conversation. Obviously, you and others in the media have been have got good sources within government about what transpired. And what is clear is that we saw last week in the executive order issued by President Trump a carve-out effectively for pre-existing arrangements such as that we had with the Obama administration. So I think that's why, in some ways, it's not a great surprise to the government that the deal's being honoured. And if you have listened to the language that the Prime Minister and others have used during the past week, there has been a degree of optimism that the status quo would remain in place, and I think that that's what we've seen today.
Might it also be the case that the government is waiting to make sure that what Donald Trump said in private to Malcolm Turnbull is actually matched by action, that we actually want to see his signature on a document to ensure that the agreement can go ahead?
Well, I think our confidence is born out of the fact that on paper we have his executive order which did carve out existing agreements such as this. So that has given us some confidence for a few days now that the deal would be honoured, and obviously that's been reinforced by the conversation the Prime Minister's had. And this has followed a long process. We have been very focused on trying to fix that mess that was left to us by the last Labor administration. Our focus initially was on getting children out of detention in Australia and closing those detention centres, of which 17 have been closed. And last year, it's moved on to sorting out the situation in Nauru and Manus. And really, that has been the fruition of an extraordinary effort by the government to ensure that what we inherited from Labor is something that could be fixed.
On the other side of the coin, a number of US allies, including Britain, Theresa May, although a little belatedly, are fairly alarmed at what's going on as far as the United States, at least temporarily, shutting its borders to people from a number of Muslim-dominated, predominantly Muslim nations, and also shutting down for 120 days its own refugee program. Australia does tend to follow the United States in a lot of things, but it won't be following the United States, I dare say, down this path, will it?
It won't, and Australia has very proudly had a record, bipartisan record of having a non-discriminatory immigration policy. If you believe in freedom of religion, if you believe in the fundamental values of individualism and those things that really are the cornerstone of a liberal democracy, then rejection of people based on their religious beliefs, on their ethnic origin, is something that I don't think that we would ever countenance in Australia.
You are a former president of the New South Wales division of the Liberal Party, hold a very important seat, North Sydney, in the federal parliament. There's been a significant reshuffle there by incoming Premier Gladys Berejiklian. What do you say to the criticism, particularly from the Labor Party, that this is all about payback and partisanship?
Well, I think that Gladys has picked a very strong team, and you've seen a balance between keeping those with experience and also a lot of fresh faces. I think on my count, there were 7 new ministers that have been included in the ministry. And I think she's got off to a really good start. And I think she's identified some of the key issues that the state will face, both in relation to its economy and transport infrastructure, but also addressing what I think is one of the burning issues that those of us who live in Sydney face, and that, of course, is the cost of housing. So I think that her team is going to be a strong one for New South Wales, and will continue the good work of Mike Baird and Barry O'Farrell before her.
Gillian Skinner, the former Health Minister, is a colleague of yours from Sydney's North Shore. About a third of her seat is within the boundaries of your own seat of North Sydney. It's a bit of sour grapes, is it not? And not particularly helpful to the incoming Premier to have to face a by-election now that she's decided to quit Parliament pretty prematurely?
Well, as a starting principle, I think it's best if people do complete their terms. But what I would say is that Gillian has given extraordinary service to this state, both as what I think, and I've seen it on the ground, a very effective local member, but also as someone who knows health better than anyone that's come before her. And I think she can be very proud of those achievements. She leaves at the end of a very long and distinguished career, and I wish her well for the future.
Briefly to one other subject. Over the weekend, Tony Abbott, who is making a point of coming up with quite a few interesting ideas in public in the period now that he's on the backbench, is suggesting that there needs to be a constitutional amendment, a referendum to alter the powers of the Senate to limit it so that there would be a joint sitting after a deadlock has been achieved, rather than having to go to a double dissolution. Is this a useful addition to the political debate?
I think it's a reasonable proposal. I would add the note of caution that, of course, Australia's history of succeeding in changing the Constitution has not been a stellar one. So a change like this would be a substantial change to the traditional powers of the Senate. But I think the point that a more seamless mechanism for resolving disputes between the chambers would be a sensible one. But can I say that I think that we face a bigger structural problem in relation to our parliament, and that is namely the fact that the federal parliament is the last that still has 3-year terms. And I think that if you really want to make a positive change to the Constitution, which would dramatically improve governance in this country, it is moving to 4-year terms for the House of Representatives. And in every test, Australian voters have supported 4-year terms, as recently as last year for the Queensland Parliament. My friend and colleague David Coleman, the member for Banks, has flagged that this is an issue that he wants to pursue this year through legislation. It was something I raised in my maiden speech. And I think if we're going to do one thing to the Constitution that will improve the nation's governance, it would be putting a referendum at the next election which introduced 4-year terms for the federal parliament. Fixed terms as well, I should add.
Indeed, a big agenda, and good luck with getting that through, a constitutional referendum, as you noted with your word of caution initially on Tony Abbott's big idea. Trent Zimmerman, appreciate your time as always. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Jim.